Hello, Nick.
Yes. Hello, is that Wayne?
Yes.
How are you, Wayne? I recognise the voice from all the movies and TV shows.
I'm well, thank you. Yourself?
I'm well. You look well, because on the TV the other day there was that, I can't remember the name of it, but it was Indians in Rock and Roll, Link Ray, and you were one of the...
Yeah, right.
You're one of the speakers there, and as usual, you were your eloquent self.
Very kind of you to say that.
I call it as I see it,
It's
Wayne.
a terrific film.
It is. There was so much I didn't know, and I never heard of that session guy that you were talking about, and I've forgotten his name now. He died in the 80s of drugs.
That narrows it down.
Yeah.
Are you talking about Jesse Davis?
That's it. Thank you very much. Now, firstly, I'll give you the big intro, Wayne. It's Nick Black, and I've got Wayne Kramer on the line over there in California, who, according to Rolling Stone magazine, is one of the 100 greatest rock guitarists of all time. Wayne, hello.
Hello. Happy to be on the line.
Well, don't believe Rolling Stone, because you know what, Wayne, they actually gave Kick Out the Jams a bad review when it was first released.
It was stunning. It was so bad. I was on acid when I read it. It bummed me out.
Is that because you had to take the acid to deal with the bad review?
No, I just happened to be on acid when the paper showed up, and I was pretty sure my career was over.
According to the wiki people, it was written by Lester Bangs.
Yep. Well, one way to think about it, at least for me, was that he was a young journalist trying to make his mark. And if you said something really outrageous, people would pay attention to it. As it turns out, Lester ended up recanting that review, moving to Detroit, joining the staff of Cream magazine, and embracing the MC5 and all its aspects, and became a good personal friend of mine till the day he died.
He had a punk rock band as well, didn't he, Wayne?
He did. Everything that he criticized in his review of Kick Out the Jams, he later embraced. And actually wasn't such a bad fellow after all. I think he just wanted to be recognized as a contributor in the world of music journalism. The best way to do that was to piss off a lot of people.
Wayne, let's start at the start now. Are you I don't know what you call a Detroit native, a Detroitian. What do you call a Detroit native?
A Detroiter.
A Detroiter. So were you born in Detroit?
I was, 1948.
What was your background? Did you go to the local school and all that?
Yeah, usual working class upbringing, played baseball, rode a bicycle, got in schoolyard fights, the typical stuff, and one day discovered the electric guitar, and I was changed forever.
So were you listening to music? Is that how you got to the electric guitar? What was the background behind that, Wayne?
Well, music was pretty ubiquitous. It was on the radio in the car. You could hear it in the neighborhoods. People had record players or listened to the radio. Teenagers had discovered their own music, this rock and roll music, and it was hugely popular. So anywhere you went, there was music going on. There were jukeboxes in restaurants and record stores, and so I couldn't have helped but be exposed to it. And the more I heard, the more it spoke to me as if from another dimension. Everybody else was kind of walking through life, but I was hearing something else in the music of Little Richard and Chuck Berry. I was hearing something. It was the siren's call.
Back in those days, music was lucky because it didn't have those damn internets and video games to compete with.
That's true.
You were listening to radio. I think there were specialist radio stations in America at the time.
Radio was a huge market. There were dozens of stations that broadcast all different kinds of music. There was country music stations. There was rhythm and blues and gospel stations. There were jazz stations. And there were pop and rock stations. It was like a smorgasbord. You could pick and choose what you wanted to listen to when. It was really fabulous. It was a great time to be alive, to be a young person in Detroit in the 50s and early 60s. The city was thriving in those days. It was a boom town. You know, in a great example of capitalism run amok, the big three auto manufacturers produced quality cars for a long time and then became imperious to the world around them. And when OPEC decided to charge $60 a barrel for oil and not $20, Detroit got stuck with all these gas guzzlers, and the Koreans and the Japanese and the Germans all had better ideas about gas mileage, and Detroit got stuck with an industry that was completely out of sync with the marketplace. So they pulled up and left, and you ended up with a city full of workers and no work, and a kind of urban decay sets in, a kind of plague that with no work, there's a desperation and a depression enters. And when you combine that with corrupt political leadership in the city, it amounted ultimately the city going bankrupt. The city went broke. You would have to wait 45 minutes for a policeman to show up for an emergency. The fire department didn't have helmets and jackets for firefighters. It was a disaster. When I lived in Detroit growing up, there were about 3 million people in the Detroit area. Today, the population of the city of Detroit is under 700,000.
Now, Wayne, so you like this music so much, you picked up a guitar. Is that how it happened?
That's how it happened. I heard the sound of the electric guitar, and I knew that that was going to be my future.
Who were the guitarists that you admired at the time?
Chuck Berry was my main man. His guitar playing was so revolutionary. He played with such velocity, and he swung so hard. No one had ever played the guitar like that before. And then, of course, his great ability to tell the story of teenage life in America was unmatched. And really, in those songs, he invented this concept that we all come to know as rock and roll. What was rock and roll? It was a way to see the world. It was a lifestyle. And then there were a few others. Guys like Dwayne Eddy were very important to me, and the Ventures were hugely important. When I learned how to play a little bit more, then I started listening to some of the jazz guitarists, Barney Kessel and Mundell Lowe and Wes Montgomery. Those guys, I couldn't figure out where they found all those notes. I had my hands full with Chuck Berry.
Hey, Wayne, you found him eventually, didn't you?
I did, yes.
Let's get on to MC5. However, initially you were friends with Fred Smith, another budding young musician, is that right?
We were schoolmates.
Did you have plans to put a band together? Fred had a band and you had your Bounty Hunters.
Right. Well, originally I just tried to join somebody else's band, but I was always a little younger than the other guys that were auditioning, and they always played better than me. So I figured, let's go to Plan B, start your own band.
Wise man, Wayne, wise man. Obviously, you hadn't found those Chuck Berry notes yet, had you? So that's probably why.
I was still working on them, yep.
So you formed your own band. So what sort of music did you play?
We played a lot of the rock instrumentals of the day. Today, we look back on them and we call them garage rock, but they were state-of-the-art at the time. Bands like Johnny and the Hurricanes or the aforementioned Dwayne Eddy, mostly instrumentals. Yeah, I was playing in bands before the first British wave. When I first saw the Beatles, my original reaction was, man, they're so old.
Some of them did get old.
Yep, some did, just like me.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I do what men my age must do to remain mobile.
Fair enough. You don't use one of those walkers, do you?
Not yet.
Obviously, Fred's and your band didn't go the whole distance, and you guys got together. Is that how the MC5 formed? Right. We decided we enjoyed playing with each other, and Fred was in a lot of ways my student. I'd been playing a little longer, and I could play a little bit better, so I'd show him all the stuff that I know, and I enjoyed his company so much. We were boys, and we liked Ian Fleming novels, and we tried to figure out how to get in girls' underwear, and we were just fantastically enthusiastic young kids, and we decided to play together, and then we ultimately hooked up with Rob Tyner, and we had a different rhythm section, but later Dennis Thompson and Michael Davis joined up with us, and we had become the MC5. Over the years, we'd learned how to play, and we learned how to write songs, and we learned how to perform for an audience, and we started to develop some ideas about music and about our place in the world, and we finally met John Sinclair, and he turned us on to the free jazz movement, which was the missing element for me, because I was trying to figure out where do I go next.
if I could play my most intense Chuck Berry solo as fast as I could play it, as loud as I could play it, where's the next step? And Albert Ayler and Cecil Taylor and John Coltrane and Sun Ra showed me where the next step was.
Because you guys were the forerunners of the punk rock movement that we know today. But you know what, Wayne? In every Ramones song I've heard, I've never heard that free jazz within that 2-minute running time.
That's always been my greatest disappointment with punk rock, is that it just hewed to those same 3 or 4 chords and it never moved out. It seemed like they missed that dimension of the MC5 and the Stooges. The Stooges listened to free jazz too. Where was the more advanced music in punk rock? It seemed like they had kind of pulled over and parked at a certain level. I understand that for them, being able to play well wasn't important. What was important was the community and the gang and the statement of identification and self-efficacy and rebellion was more important. But I'm old school and playing is important to me.
Getting back to Fred, so how did he get the moniker Sonic?
Gretsch Guitars made a version of one of their guitars they called the Sonic Boom. And he adopted that because it was an alliteration with Smith, Sonic Smith. We were all making up new identities for ourselves.
Rob was Derminer.
Bob DeMiner was his name.
Derminer. His family worked in a coal mine, obviously. There's one thing that's got to be well remembered is Rob's hair, that afro. Was that natural or was that manufactured?
I'll tell you about Rob's hair. Hair was a big issue in the 60s. There was an incredibly successful Broadway musical called Hair. And we all wanted to have hair like the English guys had, straight hair like the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. But my hair was curly and Rob's hair was kinky. And so we would try all kinds of products and techniques to make our hair straight, and it just didn't work. And in fact, at one point, Rob and I went to a barber shop in the heart of the black community where the black barbers said they could straighten hair. And we said, great, can you make it like the Beatles? And they said, yeah, sure we can. And Rob endured this terrible treatment where they put these products on his hair to straighten his hair, which are kind of like acid.
Oh, dear.
And it burned his head, and he took it all like a soldier. I mean, we thought this was going to be the solution. And then when they were done, his hair looked like a helmet, and he hated it. It was terrible. So we went home, and then a few days later, he showed up at rehearsal. He had cut it all off, and he had this nice, tight little afro start. We used to call it a natural. And we realized the way your hair comes out of your head naturally is beautiful. That's fantastic. And I let my hair get curly and just do whatever it wanted to do. And he became the founding member of the White Boy with Afro movement.
And that's something we talk about today. We don't even talk about the music. We talk about Rob's hair. That's the important thing.
That's right. The best hair in rock and roll.
Well, I've never seen a white man have such an afro. Seeing the pictures of Rob, it's just incredible. And coupled that, because he had a unique look for a lead singer, because he wasn't the typical looking lead singer. He had the huge tooth gap as well.
You couldn't have invented a better lead singer for a band. I mean, yeah, he looked like nobody else in the world. He had these skinny legs and tiny little waist and big shoulders and big hair, and he wore glasses and he had a gap in his teeth. But all that's just the physical stuff. What made him incredible was his mind. He was a genius in the truest sense of the word. He had a vision for the band. He had an idea in his mind about how the future was going to unfold and what it would be comprised of. He could draw incredibly well. He was a painter. He designed his own clothes. When he discovered songwriting, he became a world-class lyricist. He could sing his ass off. He was a soulful singer, as you can imagine, and he was a phenomenal live entertainer. He loved to get in front of a crowd and entertain the people. He could dance. He could sing. He could do it all. He was was really the singularly most creative person I've ever known in my life.
And of course, sadly, Rob died many years ago. So was it sudden or did he have health issues, Wayne? What was the problem?
Yeah, he had some health issues. We all abuse drugs and alcohol, but he also had a heart condition, and I think his time was up. He'd been hospitalized and was taking some medications, but I think that was just the hand of fate.
He and Fred sadly died very young.
They both died at 46.
And Fred, was that hard as well?
Fred drank himself to death. You might say the same for Rob, but it's hard to say. They both drank more than they should have, and I only say that as a sober alcoholic. I say that. Neither one of them took care of themselves very well.
Fred, well, he was married to Patti Smith, and I think, is this correct? Patti Smith was such a strong feminist that she'd only marry somebody she didn't have to change her name to. That's why she married Fred.
I don't know.
Just guessing there, Wayne.
What the heck? It's a good guess.
Rob, Michael and Dennis, were all they Detroitans?
Yes, we were all Detroiters. All born in Detroit, yeah.
When you formed the band, the general creative process there, Wayne, for the MC5?
We loved James Brown, so we would do his songs, and then we'd try to rearrange them to make them our own, and we'd put so much energy into rearranging someone else's song that we finally decided, let's just write our own lyrics, and this will be our song.
Plus the royalties are better too, Wayne. Did you know that?
Well, yes, we did know that the goal really was to write your own songs and play concerts, not to play cover songs in bars, but to play your own songs and play them in concert settings, travel around the world.
How did you manage to start getting gigs?
Well, I was the band leader, and I would come home from school in my school days and get on the phone all afternoon and just call everyone and every place and any place I thought a band could play. I called schools and community centers and clubs and gathering places and shopping malls. Any place that I thought a band could play, I'd call them up and offer my band services. Hospitals, mental health homes, anywhere. We would play, and we rehearsed all the time. We were relentless rehearsers. We loved what we were doing. Got to get in your 10,000 hours.
So eventually you're getting gigs, and there's a place called the Grandie Ballroom. Was this a place where bands played regularly?
No bands played there. It was built in the 1930s, and it was a big band dance hall where polite society would go and dance to orchestras. This is in the era before television. Movies hadn't really taken over yet, and there was certainly no radio yet. So people went out for entertainment 7 days a week, and one of the things they do is they go ballroom dancing. The venue had been shut down for decades, and a local promoter had gone to San Francisco and seen what was happening out there with the Fillmores and how the San Francisco scene was emerging, and he thought maybe he could reproduce that in Detroit. So he rented the Grandie, and he had to find a band that could play music that people could dance to, rock music, but that also had their own music. It was important that it was original music, and there was really only one band in Detroit that could do that, and that was the MC5. So we were hired as the house band. And we would open every night, and sooner or later, guest bands would come on tour from different cities or come from Europe, and they would always have to play with us. We played there so often. We played there every week for years, and we really were able to refine our performance and polish it to a degree of accomplishment that no other bands could really keep up with us. In fact, a lot of them would ask not to have the MC5 on the show with them.
A Grandie Ballroom for a Grandie band. There you go. 2018, 50 years since October 31.
Yep.
Danny Fields from Elektra Records, he found you. He was, I think, the A&R guy. Elektra had an amazing roster of artists. Love and The Doors. They were building a reputation, and I think The Doors' cash got them to expand quite a bit, and obviously they could afford to pay Danny Fields. So he must have heard about you guys in Detroit and came over to see you. Is that how it worked?
That is how it worked, yeah. Yeah, there was a small conspiracy of friends who connected us, and he came out to see us, and the rest was history. He was blown away by seeing this band that no one had ever heard of, with 3,000 kids showing up, going crazy for them. And he went back to his superiors at Elektra and said, "I've seen the future of rock and roll, and let's sign this band."
Okay, you didn't get him into a corner and say, "Danny, if you don't sign us, we're going to ram-a-lamma fa you."
We didn't have to.
And I think he picked up an extra band, Diggy, with his Stooges.
Well, he asked me if there were any more bands like the MC5, and I said, no, there's no other bands like us, but you do need to see our brother band, the Psychedelic Stooges. You may like them. And, of course, he fell in love with the Stooges and signed both of us.
He could pick a band. He could see the future because your high-energy rock and roll, I mean, 68 was the year of heavy rock. Beatles singing Revolution and Hendrix and Blue Cheer and all those sorts of bands. But, well, you brought the political stuff as well with the Kick Out the Jams. I'm just a music listener. I'm not a musician, Wayne. But I bought Kick Out the Jams when I was a kid. Can I bore you with my little story, Wayne?
Be my guest.
Okay. You're yawning already. I read in a rock book called the Illustrated Book of Rock, the MC5 section, and it raved on about back in the USA. I thought, oh, look, I've got to get this record. I bought the record, came back, and absolutely loved it. I thought, I've got to get the other record, Kick Out the Jams. And Kick Out the Jams was re-released locally, I think to cash in on the punk movement, but the record had the Kick Out the Jams, brothers and sisters. Now, I've forgotten what my point was.
Well, that you were a young man and you discovered this music and it was important to you.
It's an amazing record because it is so energetic. I've never heard anything come close to it. Whoever's idea was to do a live album as your first album was just genius. So whose idea was that?
It was a collective idea, partially because we were really focused on live performance. And all our energy had gone into perfecting this live appearance, this show that we developed. We weren't very experienced in the recording studio, so the possibility of a studio recording was going to be a daunting undertaking. I thought also that it was a revolutionary strategy because most bands in those days would do 2 or 3 studio albums and then do a live album. And we thought if we come out with a live album, that'll set us apart from the pack. And finally, of course, recording a live album is much cheaper than recording a studio album, and that appealed to Elektra Records.
Bruce Botnick, who engineered every Doors album, and the plan was obviously to tape you guys at the Grandie Ballroom, and it was done over 2 nights. So I'm just wondering, because Funhouse has a 10 CD box set now just for the whole Funhouse album, is there more recordings out there? Because there was one criticism of Kick Out the Jams, Wayne, I've got to tell you, is it's not long enough.
Well, I'm sorry to report there's only a couple of tracks that were outtakes from the sessions. It turns out that the Elektra Records management wanted to clean out their tape lockers, so they threw away everything that wasn't released on an album. How the Stooges held on to theirs is a mystery to me, and I'm happy to know that those tracks are still available. But I've looked for years, and the story I got is that they cleaned up the tapes and they threw away everything that wasn't released.
Oh, well, we've got what we've got, and it's truly a remarkable record. Look, everything's perfect about it. The crowd noise, the clapping, the anticipation, it all works seamlessly. The cover of Kick Out the Jams, did you guys have any ideas yourself, or this was just all Elektra Records?
Well, I thought we were involved in it. They showed us some rough ideas about what they wanted to do, and we approved those ideas. But to be frank with you, I was greatly disappointed with the artwork on Kick Out the Jams. I thought that the colors were faded. I thought the photographs were not flattering. And if you look close, you'll see all the faces of the fans have been altered. And that happened because Elektra failed to get photo releases from the audience, and they were afraid of being sued. So they manipulated everybody's face, and everyone looks like a mannequin to me. They don't look like real people. And then to add insult to injury, the art director puts a picture of himself up in the corner of our album cover.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Well, that's why we do these interviews.
That's William S. Harvey.
Yes, who hated us.
I didn't even know they invented Photoshop back then.
Well, they did it the old-fashioned way, cut and paste.
The record I've got, maybe it's different on the Australian release because the colours are quite vivid. That's all I can say in the defence of the cover here.
I know a great many people appreciate the cover, and certainly not my intention to rain on their parade. But from the inside perspective, from my perspective as the artist, I was underwhelmed with the artwork.
Now, Wayne, well, all three of the MC5 albums have lasted reputation-wise, and, well, the thing is, Kick Out the Jams made the top 30 in the album charts as well, so it did very well, especially for a debut album.
It did, yes. We had everything going for us for a minute.
Now, there was the controversy, you've probably told this story quite a few times, but there was the controversy with Hudson's.
Hudson's, yes. They were a huge department store and a chain. I had been shopping in that store since I was a little boy. It was an institution in Detroit. And they heard about the alleged obscenity on the record in the language and in the liner notes. They refused to stock the album. And since we were granted complete control of our publicity, we published an ad that said, "Fuck Hudson's if they won't sell you the record." And so Hudson's pulled all of the Elektra records out of their stock, out of their stores, and Elektra fired us.
Why didn't they just pull out the MC5 records, not the poor old record company?
Well, I think they wanted to send a message that they weren't going to allow people to talk any way they wanted to talk.
And, of course, Elektra bowed to the financial pressure that would have been added. And so was that the reason why Elektra fired you guys, yeah?
Yeah, they said we were unprofessional. We were exactly who we told them we were. I don't know if they thought we were joking about our position on things, but we weren't joking. We were deadly serious about our ideas and our beliefs and our politics, and so went ahead and became the people we said we were. It was more than they could handle, and they just wanted to be a nice record company that made a lot of money and sold some records, and they didn't want to challenge the status quo. They said they would back us in court, but of course, when it came time to go to court, they ran for the hills.
Did you have much actual dealings with Jack Holzman, the founder? And
of course, all the time, sure. And I still am friendly with Jack, and I don't bear him any ill will. I'm very close with Bruce Botnick and Danny Fields, you know, all the people. John Sinclair and I are still best friends.
It's good to see that you guys are all well and healthy, because only recently, and I thought he was still alive because he just released a book, but I didn't realise it was a posthumous book that Michael released. Have you seen the book? Have you read the book?
I have read the book, yeah.
Did they need you to get the lawyer's clearance or anything like that for it?
No, he didn't clear anything. There was no legal affairs involved in Michael's book. Yeah.
How is it as a read?
I found it amazingly insightful. There was so much I didn't know about him that I learned from the book. And in the end, I found it just heartbreakingly sad. The way he recounts it, I mean, his life was just so painful and just went from substance abuse to substance abuse and bad relationships to bad relationships, and he fathered so many children that he didn't care for. He had terrible manual labor jobs. I mean, it just broke my heart to read the book. I found it just so sad.
Just in general, did you keep in touch with all the guys after the MC5 broke up, Wayne?
Not much. We would talk every 6 or 8, 10 years. We'd talk on the phone, or you'd be somewhere and you'd run into somebody. But no, when the band broke up, we all turned our backs on each other. And really the worst thing that happened is we all lost our partners and our best friends.
Is that how the band broke up? After High Time, which was another fantastic album, but that didn't do well sales-wise, or did the band just sort of drift away? How did it break up there, Wayne?
The band didn't survive failure.
As many bands don't survive failure, do they?
Most bands. If you think about the number of bands that have emerged since 1968, it's literally thousands of bands, and you see them come and you see them go, and mostly you see them go. And it's a very complex and difficult challenge to keep people together through the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, substance abuse, and no money. Bands that survive are bands usually that have hits right out of the box. Rolling Stones, their first records were hits. The Who's first records were hits. REM's first records was a hit. U2's first records were hits. So if you have hits coming out of the box, there's money flowing. And money has a way of assuaging pain and keeping discomfort a little further away, and you have a viable business. But if there's no money coming in, it's virtually impossible to keep people together. And the MC5 story is really not unique at all in terms of the pressures that bands go through and ultimately self-destructing.
There's also, for the rare few, there's also the problem of too much money, like the Beatles, for instance. I think they broke up because of, I don't know, I think they wanted different managers, different people taking care of their money, etc., etc.
Problems of abundance.
Yes, too much or too little. You've got to get that fine line in between.
It's tricky.
Yeah, hey, that's a good title for a song.
Yep.
So now, of course, you are going to be touring to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the release of Kick Out the Jams, and you're going to be touring the States. I don't think you're going to make it to Australia, according to your office assistant, or is there a chance that you could come out here again?
Not this year, but probably next year.
Well, because I think the album was actually released in 69, recorded in 68.
Correct.
So, yeah, so technically you've got 2 years, Wayne. You've got 2 years.
Yep, you're right.
We'd love to see you back. That's all I can say.
I would love to come back. I really have great affection for Australia. I've always had a wonderful time there. I think you're doing things mostly right in your country, and America could learn a lot from Australia.
Only problem is that we look at you and we try and learn off you guys.
Yeah, don't do that right now.
We'll try, but ain't easy.
You don't have a conservative of the Donald Trump variety. This guy is rotten to his core and incredibly devious and manipulative, and he's no one to be admired. I just came back from Scandinavia, and college educations are free for everyone. Healthcare is free for everyone. They don't have a homeless problem in Sweden and in Denmark. Here in Los Angeles, the city I live in, which has unimaginable wealth, and we have 75,000 people living out of doors. It's a national disgrace, and it's an international embarrassment. The amount of wealth that exists here in Los Angeles alone, we have so many people living in just the most horrific third world conditions, to America's everlasting shame. The problem is that it puts profit ahead of people. It's a terrible system. It's just better than all the other ones. I think we could come up with something better, but we haven't yet.
Speaking of that, Wayne, after you got out of MC5, you got into a bit of trouble, but you and your wife Margaret and Billy Bragg started a thing called Jail Guitar Doors?
Correct.
Is that named after the Clash song?
Well, yeah. I served a prison term in the 1970s, and while I was incarcerated, punk rock emerged. And the Clash were a very conscious band, and they were MC5 fans. So they wrote this song. It was a B-side about their fellow musician, Wayne Kramer, and his bad behavior. And I thought it was really a great show of solidarity from some brothers across the sea that I didn't really even know and didn't think much of it until 30 years later. I had invited Billy Bragg to come and play in a prison with me, and he told me he'd launched an initiative in England to use guitars as rehabilitation tools with prisoners. And the more we talked about it, I thought, well, I should do this in America. 10 years later, and our guitars are in 180 American prisons. We run songwriting workshop programs that are designed to rehabilitate prisoners and reduce violence in prisons. In prisons across the country, we're on 12 California prison yards and in the California Youth Authority as well.
It's a remarkable thing that you're doing, Wayne, and not only that, you've had great success. You've released solo albums, you've composed music for TV, for movies, etc., etc. I wish we had time to talk about it, but we're here to talk about the MC5 and the 50th anniversary of Kick Out the Jams, which has to be the best live album ever recorded, in my humble opinion, and it's not just because I'm talking to you, Wayne.
Well, thank you so much. It's always nice to know that somebody's listening.
Yes, and you're influencing young people like myself when I was young.
Thank you. You play music because you want to play for people, so you got to go where the people are.
And is the Grandie Ballroom still standing?
Barely.
It's still there, though.
Well, sort of. I've worked with some people there in Detroit who are trying to get the ballroom placed on a registry of historical buildings. But the trouble is that the roof has collapsed now, and the elements have gotten inside the ballroom. And Michigan, the weather in the winters is horrific, and it's really starting to destroy the infrastructure of the building. Even though it's still standing there, I think the odds of it being renovated and returned to anything like its former glory are slim to none. I think it'll probably end up a pile of rubble, and they'll build a parking lot over it. That part of Detroit is so poor and so destitute that I think it'll probably just collapse.
When was the last time it was used, do you know?
Oh, it had to have been decades ago. Well, I don't think it lasted much longer than 72 or 73. I mean, no more shows were promoted there after the MC5's last performance. The original promoter had pulled out, and Detroit had begun its decline, its slip into incredible poverty, and just don't think that the venue survived.
Who would be the owners? Would the city be the owners?
Oh, no. Right now, it's owned by a church, a neighborhood church that bought the property thinking, I think, that they were going to expand and use it for their congregation, but that never happened. Congregation moved away.
The church weren't going to use it to get the MC5 and the Stooges back together for shows.
Probably not.
Oh, dear. Anyway, Wayne, look, it's been an absolute pleasure, and congratulations. There's not many artists' albums that have stood the test of time, and if it's lasted 50 years, its reputation will last well after I think we are both long gone.
Yeah, I hope. That's one of the things about diamonds and records are forever.
Well, good ones are forever. A lot of them are long forgotten, thank God.
Yep, I agree.
Wayne, thank you very much for taking time to talk with us, and a ramalama fa to you.
Well, thank you so much. I wish you well, and wish all my mainline mellows in Australia well, and look forward to seeing you all soon.
No worries, Wayne.
All right, Nick. Thank you, sir. Bye.